Mario. We've all heard of this iconic character, and if you somehow have never heard of him up until now, well, all I can really say in response to that is, you are clearly a liar, because that's just an impossible thing to claim in this day and age. During every adventure that Mario goes on, he takes on an endless army consisting of a variety of enemies, being Goombas, Koopas, Bob-ombs, Bullet Bills, etc, etc. And Mario's main combat strategy is pretty simple. Jumping on the enemies, crushing them, and taking them out of the game altogether. Which sounds kinda sadistic, don't you think? So I decided to try and fix that by attempting to beat New Super Mario Bros. Wii as a pacifist. In order for me to make this challenge as interesting as possible, I decided the only power-up I'm allowed to use throughout this adventure is the mushroom and nothing else. The mushroom only allows me to take an additional hit, while the other power-ups being the Fire Flower, Ice Flower, Star, and Penguin Suit all give me an additional way to inflict harm on enemies, whereas the Propeller Mushroom can just allow me to bypass everything very easily. And also, no Mini Mushroom either, since not only does that give me a floatier jump, which makes platforming a lot easier for me, I also cannot inflict harm on enemies at all while in this form, unless I perform a ground pound on them. So the Mini and Propeller Mushrooms are essentially like pressing instant win buttons for this challenge, so we will not be allowing the use of any additional power-ups, just the mushroom. The only enemies I'm allowing myself to inflict any harm on during this adventure will be the bosses, being the Koopalings, Bowser Jr., and Bowser himself, because it's technically shown at the very end of the game that they are not dead after the journey is complete. But as for everything else, no bouncing on Koopas to make them hide in their shell, no breaking the dry bones apart, I can't set off any Bob-ombs, I can't make enemies drop into lava through a P-switch, which sounds very specific, but we'll get to that when the time comes. No throwing shells or Bob-ombs at the enemies, and of course, I can't jump off Yoshi to save my own skin. The only deaths in this run that are acceptable are either me being bad at the game, or anything out of my control, like enemies despawning near the flagpole, getting hit while riding on Yoshi, which eventually leads to him running off a cliff, enemies being frozen by other enemies, walking or running off a ledge, or just outright destroying themselves the only way they know how. So without any more delays, here we go. World 1-1 surprisingly began with a bit of a struggle, because after passing the checkpoint, I noticed these three Goombas in a line, all walking down a slope. I thought that by letting them all walk into the pit below, I could then carry on the level, but nope. They respawned, and I failed to get past them. But then I realized on my second try that I could just do a running jump to bypass them. Every enemy in 1-2 was easy to avoid, so this stage did not give me any trouble at all. 1-3 had a couple of waiting games I had to play before I could proceed, but other than that, this stage was also not that bad. 1 tower wasn't that bad either. All the dry bones were really easy to avoid, and after smacking Larry on the head 3 times, it was time to head to World 1-4. 1-4 made me realize water levels will essentially be the easiest part of this entire challenge, because while in water, I can't accidentally jump on enemies, so I just played through 1-4 how I normally do. And then after that, I was introduced to what I'm going to call the overworld enemy. Every world in the game has one of these, or in some cases, multiple of them in one area of the map. If you collide with one, you will enter a battle with them, and the objective is to collect these 8 Toad balloons, at least I think they are balloons, to make the enemies despawn, and then Toad will reward you with 3 mushrooms for winning the battle. While you technically can do this without harming a single enemy, Mario will still kill the enemy in the overworld, even if you didn't cause any harm in the stage itself. So after making a couple of moves to get around this Goomba, I entered 1-6. 1-6 didn't have any enemies that were tricky to avoid, but I decided to still play it safe by standing on the blocks throughout the level. And then after dying in one castle, and then again in a Goomba battle, a path opened up to World 1-5, which I didn't have to do, but I still decided to do it anyway. And all I really did was wait for some paratroops to just go down a little, and the level was as good as done. One castle, just like one tower, didn't have many dry bones for me to worry about. So after jumping over them and outrunning a series of thwomps, we beat Larry again, retrieving his key, and concluding World 1. 2-1 had a couple more waiting games throughout, mainly the Sand Geysers, but aside from that, not much to complain about here. But 2-2 on the other hand, definitely did have something for me to complain about. I have to wait for this moving platform to reach the top, whilst having to try and avoid these 9 Koopas which all board the platform with me. And this also made me realise that invincibility frames are not going to help me out in certain instances, mainly when surrounded by a large cluster of enemies like this current predicament that I'm in. It took me 8 tries to finally reach the top without harming a single Koopa, and after that, the rest of the stage was really easy. The only enemy I could potentially harm in 2-3 was this singular Fire Brother, so after taking the lower pathway to avoid him, this level was pretty straightforward. 2 tower was also really straightforward, so after reaching the top of the tower and bunking right on the noggin a few times, the next stop was World 2-4, which at the end of the stage had a big group of Koopas right beside the pipe, but as long as you jump on the bricks above them, you'll be able to bypass them easily without causing them any harm. Since you cannot defeat Pokies by jumping on them, 2-5 was fairly easy, but I still think this part of the level sucks to get through. The beginning of 2-6 didn't have much for me to worry about, and after passing the checkpoint, I made my first encounter with the Flame Chomp enemy, which essentially targets the player and then proceeds to blow itself up after it's thrown every fireball that is trailing behind it. The fireballs themselves are not that bad to deal with, I just had to pay attention to where the Flame Chomp itself was going, because I probably would have accidentally killed it if I wasn't looking. Like, do you see that Flame Chomp just slowly approaching my foot? World 2 Castle is one of those levels where in order to progress, you have to take the correct path. The first 2 paths are nothing tricky to avoid, but then we get to this part of the level. The correct path is blocked off by these bricks, and I have to activate the P-switch in order to change them into coins, which in turn makes the dry bones drop down to the lower level, or possibly into the lava below if my timing is off. I initially thought keeping every dry bones alive here was not possible, so I decided to go back to World 1-3 and take the secret exit, which took me directly to World 5. And oh boy, I was thinking a massive weight had been lifted by skipping World 2 Castle, but how naive I was. World 5-1 was another cakewalk, despite me making some really dumb moves throughout. Don't ask how my mind didn't process this one Cheep Cheep just swimming here. My main concern throughout 5-2 were the swoops that fly down towards me when I went near them, but thankfully, the Wigglers essentially helped me get past them in the latter half of the level. Their blood is technically not on my hands, so I'll take what I can get. I then made what I can essentially consider the dumbest decision I made throughout this entire challenge. After failing once in 5 tower, I decided to go back to World 5-3 since the vines blocking the level cleared away. And just like back in World 1-5, I had no reason to do this level, but I did it anyway. And the reason why this was really stupid of me was because I got a game over in this level and had to go back to the start of World 5. And after beating 5-1 again, not only were the vines blocking both of the next levels, I could not find a way to get past this piranha plant on the map. It turned out I had to play World 5-1 again in order to get the vines to move, and after getting lucky with the piranha plant, I hopped back into 5-2, beat the level again, and finally made it back to 5 tower, where this time, I made sure not to harm a single dry bones during the climb, and after dealing with Iggy, it was time for what I'm considering the worst level in this entire challenge. World 5-4. Throughout World 5-4, you are riding on top of this raft, and the main problem here is if 5 enemies are on the raft at any given time, it will stop in place and I cannot progress any further. The level began with just Goombas and Green Koopas, which both just eventually walk off the platform, so I just thought to myself, I guess all I have to do is just wait for them to walk off. Sounds tedious and slow, but I guess it's doable. But then, midway through the level, I get introduced to these tiny assholes, Mini Goombas, which, unlike the regular Goombas, which just walk in one direction unless they collide with something, which in that case, they just turn around and walk the other way, these frustrating little pests constantly follow me, and while they can't inflict any damage themselves, they not only slow me down, but because they are in a group, it's enough to make the raft come to a dead stop. I figured that by jumping over and over again, I could keep making the platform move slightly, but even that was not a good idea. I played this level over and over again for nearly an hour, and I just couldn't find a foolproof way to deal with these small fuckers. So I eventually just gave up on this level and decided to reattempt World 2 Castle, because, as I said earlier, the reason I skipped this level was because I initially thought it was impossible, but the reality is, I just didn't know the timing of when to press the P-switch, so if I could just time it perfectly, I may be able to complete the level, and after several failed attempts and switching to a completed save file just for convenience because I got game overs constantly on the save I was playing on, this happened. I actually did it. I somehow managed to press the P-switch without accidentally killing a single dry bones. Yeah, after that, I decided to consult with my referee on what happened to determine whether or not this counted in my favour, and this was what he had to say.
You pressing a P block does, well, it does trigger it. However, if the dry bones ain't smart enough to walk away, how's that your fault? They were the ones to walk on where the P block stuff was. And once the time ends, if they haven't gotten off, that's not really on your hands. They decided to walk there. So yeah, that's my consensus on Mario philosophical stuff. Yeah, baby.
So in simpler words, this counts, and I can proceed to beat Roy a second time and make my way into World 3. World 3-1 was not that bad, but I ended the stage by almost ruining this Cooligan's day. Like, look how close I was to accidentally stomping on this guy. I was struggling quite a bit with the first half of 3-2, but after I passed the checkpoint, the rest of the level was not that bad. The beginning of 3-3 was nothing too crazy, and while there are a decent amount of Goombas to avoid much later on, they could easily be jumped over, get frozen by an ice brother, or get knocked out by an icicle. Since I cannot harm the boos without the use of a star, 3 Ghost House was essentially a guaranteed win. But then came 3 Tower. After reaching the checkpoint, I found myself on another moving platform, and just like in World 2-2, more and more enemies get on board the higher I go, but this time instead of Koopas, it's dry bones. And thankfully, compared to 2-2, this one was not that bad because the platform actually expanded the higher I went. And also, during the climb, 2 spike balls eventually come onto the platform, and not only do they get rid of the dry bones, but they can also activate the power block, preventing any more on the higher platforms from coming on board. So after the first power block was set off, I finished the rest of the stage with no more issues. 3-4 was a pretty fun level, but the reason I lost a decent chunk of lives here was because I just made a bunch of dumb decisions throughout. Nothing new, I guess. 3-5 had close to no enemies throughout the stage, just a few paratroopers and fire piranha plants, so this was another easy level. Then after activating the red switch and beating 3-4 again, the next stop was 3 Castle, and this level is literally impossible. The path is blocked by giant chunks of ice, and our only option to progress is by setting off these bar bombs, and since I'm not allowed to do that, my only other option is to take the secret exit in 3 Ghost House to reach the cannon, which takes me to World 6. And this time, I felt confident that a massive weight has been lifted from this challenge, considering not only did I skip 3 Castle, but this also allowed me to bypass the dreaded World 5-4. But am I now fully in the clear at this point in the challenge? Only one way to find out. The end of the 6-1 looks like an absolute nightmare to get through, but I took my time with it, and it didn't give me as much trouble as I thought it would. In 6-2, the piranha plants and swoops both didn't give me any issues, and the spinies dropping from the ceiling either took down other enemies for me, or they would collide with one another and take each other out. So overall, another really easy level, and 6-3 was pretty much the same deal. 6-4 introduces the Monty Moles, which, just like the mini Goombas, follow me around. But because I'm not restricted to a moving platform, which will just stop when too much is on top of it, they thankfully did not make this level any harder for me. 6 Tower had close to no dry bones, since this level was focused around these spiky pillars. So after climbing to the top of the tower, and giving Morton a few bonks to the head, I headed into 6-5, which also had close to no enemies in it. Just the Porky Puffer and a few Red Koopas. That's it. World 6-6 lasted quite a while for pretty obvious reasons, but aside from that, the only real problem I had during this stage was dodging the fireballs at the end, but other than that, there isn't much for me to say here, so on to 6 Castle, which also didn't have much for me to say. Just take the lower path here, and watch out for the spike balls after the checkpoint, then give Morton 3 more bonks to the head, and then on to 6 Airship, which once again had close to nothing for me to worry about. And with that, we are officially done with World 6. 2 more worlds to go. 7-1 only had a few Red Koopas to jump over, so nothing to worry about yet. The only enemy I could potentially inflict harm on in World 7-2 were the Bullet Bills, but thankfully, there definitely weren't as many as there was in World 6-1, so this stage was a breeze. Since Fuzzies were the only enemy that could be seen throughout the entirety of World 7-3, this was another level where it was just straight up impossible for me to inflict any harm. 7 Tower though was a bit tricky. It took me 3 tries to get to the top of the first half of the level without hitting a single Bullet Bill, and the main issue I had with the latter half was trying to avoid bombs that got shot out from cannons that were not even on the screen yet. This part wasn't that bad, and it only took me 2 tries to reach the top. 1 Koopaling battle later, and our next stop is World 7 Ghost House. After dodging the bruises in the first room, the rest of the level was just a walk in the park. 7-4 however, was definitely not a walk in the park, mainly because of this part right here. While I did nail the jump the first time, after I died later on in the level, I for some reason just could not replicate what I did the first time, and after looking back at my footage, I asked myself, why didn't I just do what I did the first time, which was to wait for the pipes to lower and damage boost through the Koopa? But because I didn't think about that at the time, I decided to go back to 7 Tower and take the alternate exit, which took me to 7-6. and this level only has power beetles, which I cannot harm at all. So another free level, and believe it or not, 7 Castle is also a free level, because by beating 7-6, I could essentially skip the entirety of the castle, meaning all I had to do was beat Ludwig once more, and that was it for World 7. Only one world left now. Let's finish this. World 8-1 had more waiting games, mainly with the meteors and lava, but aside from that, this level was doable. I almost accidentally crushed this small Goomba halfway into 8-2, but after that, there were no more enemies for the rest of the stage. 8-3 had these chained platforms which could potentially lead to me accidentally dunking a Koopa in lava, but since I got through this area pretty quickly, I didn't have much else to worry about, until I got to 8 Tower and fought Magic Koopa, because not only did this guy warp away whenever I felt confident that I could hit him, but most of the time, he warps into spaces I can't get to quick enough, and he can also summon enemies onto the arena. I did beat him on my second attempt, but my first attempt sucked. Okay, about that. So, I just finished recording all of my dialogue for this video, and after looking back on my actual second attempt, because the footage you are watching right now is from a later attempt, what happened on my actual second try was, before I got the third and final hit on Magic Koopa, he spawned a Buzzy Beetle which I accidentally hit. So yeah, this stage is also possible, mainly as long as bullshit like this doesn't happen. World 8-4 also sucks. It is a water level, which as we previously established, is essentially a freebie in this challenge, but it's a dark underwater level where I could barely see anything. So again, while I was essentially guaranteed to pass this level, it was just not a fun one to play through. 8-5 began with a similar challenge to World 7 Tower, although here, I had a lot more time to react to the bob-bombs coming down. The second half of the level had me dodging Krobers, and I surprisingly found these easier to deal with compared to the bob-bombs. While the Koopas in 8-6 didn't give me too much of a challenge, I couldn't help but feel sorry for them, since all of them here eventually met a fiery demise. After dodging dozens of cannonballs fired at me in World 8 Airship, I beat Bowser Jr. one last time, meaning all that's left is Bowser's Castle. And guess what? Only one Dry Bones enemy in this entire stage. That was it. So as long as I avoided the platform he was standing on, I could reach Bowser and finish him off, meaning I have officially beaten New Super Mario Bros. Wii. You gotta be kidding me. I have officially beaten New Super Mario Bros. Wii as a pacifist. And I gotta say, this was a really fun challenge to play through, and an awesome revisit to my childhood. And who knows, if you enjoyed this video and want to see me do more videos like this, because I am planning to do this challenge again for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, then I highly recommend you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss out on what's to come. Links to my Twitter and Discord are also in the description below. And until next time, fellow pretzels, have a nice day. Bye!